you.
Well,
like
you have a lot of fans. So thank you very much for doing this. Let's talk about two things tonight. One is your career as a performer, and second, the new book that you just come out with, Music in Mind, which I highly recommend to people because I've just finished reading it, and it makes me realize I should have been a musician when I was younger and my brain would be better, but okay. So being an opera performer is very easy, right? You can rise to the top relatively easily. There are many jobs to get to the top. So why did you pick an easy profession? It's so easy to rise to the top.
Oh my goodness. Well, of course, there's nothing easy about it. It's an unbelievable number of skills that we have to develop, and it's incredibly competitive, and only more so as time goes on.
So when you were a little girl, both of your parents were music teachers?
Right.
And did they say, we want you to be the most famous opera singer in the world, or what did they say?
No, they said you should be a music teacher. And I majored in music ed, so that was my kind of path. But I just kept singing and enjoying it and loving the practice room, and I just became passionate about singing, the music, learning 3 centuries of music. I had a Fulbright scholarship and studied in Germany for a year, and that was an incredible experience. So I just kept going, and finally at one point I said, I guess I'm doing this.
But you initially were going to be maybe a jazz singer or not an opera singer.
That's right. That's right. I love jazz. I sang with a big band in undergrad, and I also sang with a trio every weekend for 2.5 years and thought I would continue that. But I was a little shy. I was an innately shy person, and so graduate school seemed like a much better fit for me,
So
and
you went
was.
initially to State University of New York at Potsdam.
Right.
And then you went to Eastman School of Music
Yes.
at Rochester.
University of Rochester.
And then you ultimately went to Juilliard.
Juilliard, yeah.
And at what point did you decide you wanted to be an opera singer as opposed to another type of singer or performer?
Well, at that time, you couldn't study jazz, really. Maybe, I don't remember anything at that time. So you could only study classical music, whether you wanted to be a jazz singer or a Broadway singer. And I loved singing classically. So, and I wanted to do well in school and get roles in the operas and in the musicals, and it was really only opera and oratorios. So I was on that track, really. Educationally, I was definitely on a classical track.
The hard part about being an opera performer is there are not that many opera companies relative to private equity firms, right? So to get to the very top, there just aren't that many positions. So are you always competing with other people who you pretend you like, and then you're competing with them in auditions, and then did you win an audition that took you to the top?
Well, there's one difference in that we sing internationally. So I've sung on every continent. I've sung all over Europe and Asia, everywhere. So there actually are a lot of places to perform. And I would say that the big houses represent the top, and in the US certainly, but there are tons of regional houses as well. They're struggling now. Many of them were built not that long ago, in the 90s. So it's difficult to say where we'll end up, but sometimes the smaller cities are better able to support some of these arts organizations.
Okay. So as a result of modern technology, in all singing today, everything is electronic except for opera. Why is it opera is still holding out and saying we can't have magnified voices? Why is that? And is it hard to sing to an audience that's way in the back when you have to magnify your voice by yourself? Is that a trick?
So you mean amplifications or having a microphone?
Right.
So you're right about this. We are the holdouts. And I think it's a very traditional art form, and some of the fans are extremely tied to those traditions. So although I actually believe it would be helpful to have some enhancement, because orchestras don't have as much time and the will to have to play softly enough for us to be heard over, not only the orchestra, but the chorus in a house that seats 4,000 seats. So I actually think this might help a little bit, but people feel it would be a slippery slope. And we need to maintain the tradition of hearing unique human voices without any amplification.
You were a Fulbright scholar in Germany, and you learned German, which obviously helps with German operas. But when you're a performer performing in Italian opera, or a normal person doesn't speak foreign languages, do they really understand they really understand what they're saying. They learn the song in Italian or German or French, but they really understand what they're saying, or they just know how to sing that song?
So both. So when I sing in Russian and certainly in Czech, I've learned those languages by rote. But you have to learn. You have to sound like an authentic and native speaker, and you also have to memorize what everyone else is saying. So it's very time-consuming to sing in languages you don't speak, which is why I was happy to sing a lot in French, a lot in German, the languages I speak.
And you have performed more than 50 operas, so you know more than 50 operas.
Right.
And I think one point you said you've got enough operas, you didn't need to learn another 50. But
yeah.
Of all the operas you performed, which one did you enjoy the most, or which one or two did you enjoy most performing?
Well, I had a Rosenkavalier. See, that was definitely, that was the role that I loved the most. She was the most interesting role of all of them that I performed, and she was able to also age with me. I had a very different take on her when I sang it in my 30s than I did a few years ago. So that was great, but I love all the new stuff I do now too. I mean, I really enjoyed Streetcar Named Desire. Blanche Dubois is one of the great theatrical roles, and it's no less great in the opera.
So when you're doing opera and you're singing, let's say on the Metropolitan Opera, and you've performed there many, many times, and I think you were the first woman to ever headline an opera opening there by yourself.
Right, thank you.
So when you're doing that, do you ever forget the words while you're in the middle of an aria? Or do the other people you're singing against, do they forget the words, and what do you do when they forget? Or what do you forget? What do you do?
This is the beauty of this all being in foreign languages. It's very helpful, and what we tend not to, forgetting the music is a much bigger problem. If you got lost, or if you've dropped 5 phrases and just stand there, or if you don't come in, all those things have happened, by the way. And so that can be really tragic, but if you drop one word, no one would notice.
So when you're doing an opera, it takes a lot of energy, and obviously it's a lot of pressure. In some places, like La Scala, it's famous for booing an opera performer. Have you ever had that experience, or have you ever seen anybody being booed, or what is that like?
I was booed, and it was really, it was just an unbelievable night. It was such a fiasco.
At La Scala?
Yes, it started in the beginning with the tenor, and then the conductor passed out. He literally fainted on the podium, and I think he was just terrified that this was going to be a disaster. They were nice to me until the end of my aria when I interpolated a cadenza. They were very much against the cadenza. So, but you know, if you're not used to it, it is a pretty shocking experience.
So you were probably in your mid to late 30s before you knew that you were going to be a great performer, not just an average performer. Is that normal in the opera world to know not until your 30s, or can people know in their 20s that they're really going to be a superstar?
You know, I was always told that mid-30s is the prime, the physical prime of us as singers. We have more strength, we have more stamina, but you know, there are a lot of stars who are in their 20s who come on the scene and they're already amazing. So it depends a little bit on your repertoire. If you're singing very heavy repertoire like Wagner, heavy Verdi roles, it happens much later.
So you've been asked, I think you were the first opera performer, maybe the only one, to sing the Star-Spangled Banner at the Super Bowl.
Right.
Is there pressure when you're singing that to not forget the words? Does that ever happen to you?
Oh, can we not talk about this? Because I had a terrible experience with the national anthem. So we all know it. We sing it. We don't even think about it, right? Well, try singing it in front of a lot of people with a 6-second delay on your face and your sound. It's very distracting. So fortunately, it wasn't the Super Bowl when this happened. Right. And so I knew to be ultra prepared for the Super Bowl. And they rehearsed me, including with the Black Hawk helicopters. They really wanted to make sure I was prepared. So
unfortunately, some opera sopranos have a reputation for being divas. You've probably heard of this, but why is it that some opera performers, typically women, maybe it's sexist that they get this appellation, but they're called divas? Why are there so many opera singers called divas, and you have a reputation for not being one? How did you avoid being a diva?
Well, so diva was defined for Sarah Bernhardt, who's a great French actress in the late 19th century. early 20th century, and she really lived the role in every way. But I always say I'm a diva on stage, you know, because diva means goddess. That's what it means. Sopranos, of course, took over the name early in the 20th century, and we kept it until recently, when now it's great pop singers who are also virtuosic have it as well. Household products are called diva. I mean, it's definitely, the meaning has been expanded.
Yeah.
But the bad behavior, which is the more common version of it right now.
So one of your daughters is in the audience. I won't out her by pointing her out, but she's here, I think. And when you have two daughters.
Yeah.
When you have young children.
I'm so lucky.
When you have young children and you're an opera singer, can you yell at them, or you can't yell at them because you don't want to ruin your voice? So what do you do when you want to yell at your children? You can't ruin your voice, so how do you just speak softly to your children?
It was the only time I had to cancel a few performances at the Met. It wasn't Amelia, it was her little sister, and it was one of those up the stairs, Sage, get downstairs right now, and I felt it go.
Oh.
And I went, so then I never did that again, and now I would say to the girls, I am so mad, and they would laugh. So I wasn't very effective after that,
Okay.
but I did save my voice.
So I assume you get this question a lot, but when I get laryngitis, you know, take some cough drops, maybe some tea and honey, and maybe it'll go away in a day or so. It never works, but eventually 2 or 3 days later it goes away. When you're an opera singer and you get laryngitis in the morning, what do? You panic, or what do you do?
So I've almost never had laryngitis.
Really?
I've had colds, I've had lots of infections and viral infections, and colds I can sing on. It gives me more resonance, actually. It's when if you get a cough, that can be bad. But we're experts. We know everything that's in the drugstore. We know what to take and what combination. But you know what? Steam, tea, all of that, it's still pretty simple. Gargle with salt water. There are special drugs now that can help a little bit more, but it's pretty basic. You have to wait till it goes away, basically.
So when you perform at the Metropolitan Opera or equivalent place, you have lots of costumes and it's a very important part of opera. How frequently do you have to? How early do you have to get there before the opera goes on to get all that makeup and hairs and everything else done? How many times do you have to change the costumes during the performance?
So opening night, I want to be there about 2 hours before. Normal performance, an hour and 15 minutes is okay, because you also have to warm up. And you get it down to sort of kind of quickly, getting the hair. It's usually a wig and makeup, so the wig is easier. Costume changes, it depends on the show. It can be 1 or it can be 10. And quick changes are hard, and sometimes you're running around backstage, so it really depends on the opera.
Now, you've been a very famous opera performer for quite some time, but in recent years you have been on Broadway. You have done a lot of concerts where you perform as a soloist. How do you measure the pleasure of being a soloist with a famous orchestra or being on Broadway compared to being an opera performer?
So because I did so many roles, I love touring now, and that's mostly what I do. I'm touring now a project with National Geographic called Voice of Nature, the Anthropocene. I won a Grammy for this album last year, and I said, I'm going to tour this, and I met, through my husband, the CEO of the National Geographic Society, and he said, we'll make your films for you. And so I tour, I sing classical and some music that I've recorded, like Bjork, and also some selections from some famous movies. And I actually am loving this project. Right. So it tells the story, a little bit of climate change, but also just let's love this planet.
So when you're a professional and your job is to perform as a concert performer, or it's say in an opera, how many times do you get people calling you saying, can you come and perform for this benefit for free? And you have to go give up a night to do it, and do people frequently call you, and how do you tell them you can't do it because you're busy or something?
Well, it's not hard, actually. I do get called a lot for these things, but we're not very free. We travel constantly. I'm on a plane almost every 3 days. It's like second only to you in terms of a schedule. And as I said, we're traveling all over the world, so it is a crazy life. It is really a crazy lifestyle. Both of my daughters are very gifted, and our running joke is they know too much.
So Frank Sinatra used to say, I don't like to sing for my supper. So in other words, people would call him and say, I'm going to give you an award, but by the way, can you sing at our event? Do you get that where people say, I'd like to give you a great award, but by the way, can you perform? Do you get that a lot?
Yeah, we don't do that. We don't do that. We don't think it's right, actually. That
Okay.
you know, because if I am going to perform, it's a whole different mindset. I mean, just think about the wardrobe alone. So it's a lot of effort. It's planning. It's rehearsing. It's not. People just think you because you're a singer and your instrument is in your body. It's not a big deal, but it's always a big deal.
So if you could sing at any one, let's say, place because the acoustics are so good, is that Carnegie Hall? Is it someplace in Tokyo? Is it where is the best place in the world to sing with the acoustics?
I love Carnegie Hall.
Okay.
I love that hall. I love the way it looks. I love that I can see the audience, and I love the way it sounds. And there are other halls that are great. I love Concertgebouw in Amsterdam and the Musikverein in Vienna. These are all famous halls.
So after you perform in an opera, very often a young girl will come up and give you some flowers. What do you do with those flowers? What happens to those flowers? I always wonder,
Well, I mostly get flowers when I'm on the road and I'm flying the next morning,
Okay.
so I usually give them to the dresser or the
Okay.
makeup artist or somebody who's in the, helping out, and they're usually happy to take them home. Here in New York, I enjoy them.
Okay.
If I happen to be here, I enjoy them. I love flowers.
So very often when you're performing an opera and you're the lead performer, at the end you get a standing ovation. How do you know how many times you're supposed to go out for the standing ovation? Is it 3 times, 4 times? How do you gauge how many times you're supposed to go out?
I love you think of these questions, and it's like what you always wanted to know but never asked. It depends on you gauge the applause. You can hear when it's dying down, and if you really don't want to go out anymore, you ask them to turn the lights up.
Oh,
So now that's an inside trick.
Oh, okay. Now we know. Okay. All right. So you've been a very famous performer, and most people who have a career that's done as well as yours would say, I can do this forever. Why do I need to do anything else? But you've invented a new career for yourself, in effect, which is what this book is about, music and mind. And it's really about how music changes the brain and actually brings people into greater happiness and can help people with diseases that help them cure or mitigate the disease. So how did you get into this area?
So I had my own issues. So I had terrible stage fright from time to time in my career that was debilitating and almost really derailed me. I also had somatic pain. I had tremendous pain as a kind of a hedge against performance pressure. So those two things got me reading constantly about mind-body connection, trying to unpack this. And I met Dr. Francis Collins at a dinner party 7 years ago in Washington, and I said, hey, why are scientists studying music? Don't they have great things to do, like cure cancer? I mean, and so because I had noticed that there was a lot of neuroscience around music. And so he said, it's the brain. He said, we have a new brain initiative, and we want to really understand and learn more about this, the most complex object in the known universe. And music happens to activate more parts of the brain than any other activity. And it's because, it's all in our DNA, and it's all about evolution.
So Dr. Francis Collins, for those who don't know, was for a long time the head of the NIH under 3 different presidents, which is unusual to do. He's also a musician, country music performer of some type, and also the person who co-discovered the human genome. Very, very impressive person. So he said, okay, we'll kind of do this, but you point out in your book, one of the authors in your book, this book is an anthology of some of the most famous scientists and performers in the country, in the world, talking about this issue. And you point out, in one of the articles points out that Hippocrates in 700 BC, began to say that music actually is a way of curing people's illnesses and has a beneficial effect. So as far back as 700 BC, people were thinking about this. Were you shocked to learn that people thought about this a long time ago?
No. In fact, it's remarkable. I mean, there's so much this is why studying history is a really smart thing to do, because very little is new, right, in terms of who we are as human beings. But discovering really that the thing about music is that because it's so powerful in the brain, and it takes so many kind of processes in the brain, that's what gives its power, but it's also an experience that happens in time. So it gives us time to really be in the moment, to really experience the calming effect of music, or the effect of music that makes us clean better and get more done, or exercise faster. It has a huge effect on us, and it's everywhere. So it's the elephant in the room, really, and using it now because of research and because of technology, which can look at the brain while we're doing these activities, gives us the opportunity to use it in a therapeutic manner.
Now, you had your brain looked at through some kind of MRI scan that was pointed out in the book, and it said that your brain got more excited when you were thinking about music as opposed to actually performing it. Is that right?
Yeah. More parts of my brain were activated by imagining singing than speaking or singing, which was really interesting. The scientists were surprised, and finally they said, "Oh, right, you're a singer." So the singing part would be easy for you, but one of us who had to do that experiment, it might be a little bit different.
So when young children go to school, they're very often by the 3rd or 4th grade told to, maybe learn a musical instrument. And it says in the book that you can look at the brain, part of the brain of a young child who has had some musical training at the beginning, and you can see that some part of his or her brain is more expansive because of the training you get. So, and that's why I think a lot of countries, their parents want to get their children to learn a musical instrument. My mother, because my last name was Rubenstein, said, "You should learn the piano," but piano teacher said, "Save your money. There's no musical talent there." But so people who get musical talent early on, that's a very important part of their life. It makes them happier, presumably. But what you've talked about a bit in the book is people that have illnesses get illnesses cured more readily by listening to music. So, for example, you point out that people that have dementia, people that have post-stress syndrome,
PTSD,
yeah.
Parkinson's
particularly.
Yes.
So how does that work? Where your brain is saying all of a sudden I'm going to be excited because music's coming in? Why? Does anybody understand that?
They're all different. So music is the last kind of alive part of a person with advanced dementia or Alzheimer's disease to go. So I saw this with my husband's aunt, and she could sing the words and lyrics to a number of songs and didn't know the people around her and could not speak. So this, in plasticity of the brain, is another way we're learning about this. So the singing part of the brain is not the same as the speech. So now, if you have a stroke, for instance, and have aphasia, you can have one session with a music therapist and regain speech by singing. I mean, it's not very complicated, but it works, and most people don't know about it.
So there are, you point out in the book, there are people at major hospitals now who are musical therapists who go into patients that have serious problems, and they kind of either get them to get involved in music or have music performed or maybe get them sing. Is that now becoming more common?
Well, the music therapists are actually board certified, highly trained. Most of them have master's degrees, and they are trained in interventions that are very specific. So the one I just spoke about, a nonverbal autistic child can learn speech through that same method. It's called melodic intonation. For Parkinson's, it's really just listening to music using rhythm and audiation, which is imagining music, would enable you to move freely without shuffling or freezing, which is remarkable. But so there are, those are specific things, but if you go into a hospital and there's an orchestra playing or someone's playing the piano, we call that music medicine, and that is a way of really helping people relax and reducing anxiety in the caregivers and the families.
So a number of the articles point out that people have greater happiness when they're performing music in a chorus. In other words, if you're a singer and you don't get quite the same degree of happiness or health benefits as if you are in a chorus. Why is that? Why would that be?
So we're learning a lot about singing now. So singing can improve cardiac health. It improves vascular health, because for people who are very sedentary and who have the disease, this is athletic for them. It's exercise. So they've gotten a huge grant actually to continue the study. Jacqueline Kalinsky, she's a beautiful chapter in there. But it's singing in a choir definitely improves your immune system. Think about how social it is also. And now we know that our brain waves align when we're singing together. But my favorite, latest research is for postpartum depression. So there was a study in the UK that found if you have postpartum depression and join a choir, you're much better. If you have really bad postpartum depression and join a choir, it helps you even more. So that surprised me. I did not expect for singing at all to be that useful.
So it is often said by some doctors that if you want to thwart the possible onset of dementia or Alzheimer's, you can do several things. One is learn a foreign language, which is hard for me to do, or if you can exercise more, also hard, learn a musical instrument, or do crossword puzzles. So I'm not good at any of that, but if I said I wanted to learn a musical instrument at my advanced age, is it really easy to do now? Can you learn a musical instrument, or can you really perform at a, can you learn to sing more easily than play the piano or something? You
can have fun with it. You can really enjoy it. You can get better at it. If you like music, and it doesn't matter what kind of music you like, that's the other thing. This is not classical music. It's whatever you like. It's all taste-based. And that's true for any of these interventions. But yeah, absolutely. And think about it. When you're playing an instrument, you're using motor skill. You have to listen. You have to read the page and translate the page. That's a very complex activity for the brain and body to perform. It's very good for health.
In the book, it also points out that throughout history, at funerals or celebrations of death, you have music. And why is it that music is thought to be a good thing to have at a celebration or a memorial ceremony?
So throughout history, music and the arts have given us social cohesion. We are clearly a very tribal being, and which is not going well for us in the world today. But in the past, it's what enabled us to cooperate with each other and to stay together. So music was drumming, singing, chanting, all of these activities, artistic activities, were part of what kept us together. So music has been used for mostly for kind of somber periods of time. I sang at 9/11. On site a month after the attack, and I'll never forget that, to look out at a sea of 9,000 people who were families of people who were lost. So this is the type of event where we wanted music to bring us together.
Suppose you're tone deaf, as I probably am, so that doesn't make it, you can still sing if you really are tone deaf?
Very few people are actually tone deaf. So, you should have singing lessons, David. I would give you a singing lesson.
Well, one time, I'll tell you my experience, and the reason I know I'm tone deaf is that I was in Las Vegas, and I took my children, and naturally I'm wearing a suit and tie. I'm the only person in Las Vegas sitting in a suit and tie, and I'm in the front row, and there was a Cher imitator on stage, and she wanted somebody to come up and perform with her, and naturally she saw me, suit and tie, she picks me up, she says, "Hey, come on up and sing," and I said, "Look, I'm tone deaf, I can't sing." She said, "Nobody's completely tone deaf." She got up there, she said, "Just put your hands on my hips and sing, 'I Got You, Babe.'" I said, I can remember that, "I Got You, Babe." So I did that for about 2 minutes, and she said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first person I've ever seen who is completely tone deaf." So I don't know, maybe I could overcome it, but...
I don't know, you have to learn how to match pitches. It's definitely possible. You may have been very intimidated. That sounds like... Did somebody film that, David? I would love to see that film.
What gives you the greatest pleasure? Performing in front of a sold-out house at the Metropolitan Opera and getting rave reviews and 10 different ovations, or teaching people how they can make their life better by using music? How do you compare the relative pleasures?
Well, they're related, because my whole career, people came up to me afterwards and said, "Your music got me through cancer, got me through divorce, got me through the loss of my parent." And worse. And I stayed in touch with some of these people, and that gave me more pleasure than anything, and more sort of like a sense of purpose. And this very much is related to that, because when we think about aesthetic experiences, and by the way, January 1st this year, I said, okay, I'm going to live this life. And I stopped watching all of the opinion news. I watch the news once a day, and I do a lot of things I love that are aesthetic. I'm in nature, I'm reading novels, I'm going to plays and museums everywhere I perform. I cannot tell you how much happier I am.
So when you're doing all that, do people come up to you all the time for selfies? They recognize you, or do you have sunglasses so they don't bother you so much? Or how do you avoid getting everybody ask for a selfie or autograph, sing an aria while you're standing around?
Yeah, that only happens when I'm walking across Lincoln Center or at the Kennedy Center.
Okay.
Because if you think about how we look on stage, certainly in opera, people don't recognize us easily off stage.
So on this book, this book is a big book. So it can be intimidating, but it's not actually that hard to read. And so I would encourage people to read it. And this is why I think it's interesting. It's an anthology. So there are several dozen people, Yo-Yo Ma, Dr. Francis Collins, other people, Deborah Butter, the president of the Kennedy Center, who've written articles in here, so you can pick and choose what you want to read by the people you want. So it's actually, I think, pretty easy to get through, and I highly recommend it. I enjoyed reading it over the last few days, and I would say, do you have another book planned, or is this one?
Not at this point. I mean, Roseanne Cash's chapter was in People magazine yesterday, and it is a harrowing chapter. Did you see it? I mean, what she went through is unbelievable. So you don't have to read the whole thing. It's the kind of thing that you can pick the things you enjoy. There's a section on education, music education. And there are sections on the future. I mean, that's a really fascinating chapter.
So you point out in the book that you have, I think, 5 major organizations you're kind of involved with now. They are the Los Angeles Opera,
right?
Carnegie Hall, the Kennedy Center, where you're an artistic advisor, and also Sound Music.
Sound Health, yeah.
Sound Health. Sound Health, we'll describe that in a moment. And then Aspen Music Festival.
Right, Aspen Music Festival,
okay.
Right.
So can you describe what sound music is?
It's also the NeuroArts Blueprint, which I adore. Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross's Your Brain on Art. If you haven't read that, look at that.
But essentially what you do is you try to get people to learn much more about how music can help them heal. Is that what sound music is about, Sound Health?
Sound Health is, so that's the initiative at the Kennedy Center. And I basically, when I met Francis Collins, I said, I just started as an advisor to the Kennedy Center, and I think the audience would love to know about this. It's so interesting. I think we could provide a platform for science in an artistic environment. I've come to now believe 2 things. One, that the arts should be embedded in healthcare across the boards. It is so additive. And 2, that performing arts centers should become community centers where we can meet and regain some of that social cohesion through conversations, through doing things, through eating together, being together as human beings. So this is also kind of a map. And it's not just music, it's also for the visual arts. There are great chapters in here. Liz Diller writes an amazing chapter on architecture. It's all aesthetic experiences. I mean, you know that because you're here.
So we have some questions from the audience. Let me read some of them. What is the current importance / health benefits of breath control? What is breath control?
So breathing in general, so breath control is one aspect of the type of trained breathing that we do as singers. It's controlling the rate of speed at which your breath comes in or out. Another more challenging thing that we do is breath support. So that's what enables us to sing those long high notes. I just saw Leon Jean Price. She answers the door singing a sustained high C. I love her. So, yeah, breathing is really great. So pulmonary health we learned a lot about during COVID because people had difficulty. And so there's an initiative called Healing Breath, and I shared some of our secrets, and a lot of my friends shared theirs. It's on YouTube now at Google Arts and Culture, and it really helps. So singing or breathing lessons, if you have difficulty breathing or any pulmonary issue, can make a huge difference.
Now, there was a basketball coach once in Washington, D.C., who famously said, this is the thing he's most famous for, the opera's not over until the fat lady sings. And what he was really...
Is that Yogi Berra, right?
Well, I don't know, but I would say, why is it that so many opera performers seem to be heavy and you're so non-heavy? So does that hurt when you're not heavy and you're in really great shape? And is it why do some opera singers seem to be, let's say, heavy?
So it is not something that's a requirement of certain repertoire. It's not really. However, I do think that people discover they have great voices if they have gravitated towards an artistic kind of background in high school or even in middle school. And sometimes they tend to be bigger people, and there's no barrier. We want all shapes and sizes. We want people with talent. We want people who have beautiful voices and who know how to break our hearts, basically, when they sing. So it is one of the areas, actually, in entertainment where it's not a barrier.
So you've performed with some of the most famous opera performers of the last, 50 years or so. What was it like to sing with Luciano Pavarotti? Did he actually know what he was doing? Did he? He couldn't read music, right? So how was it like to? Yeah. Somebody couldn't read music.
I miss his voice so much. What a great, great tenor. And I work with young singers a lot now, and I just say, you need a better A vowel. Go on YouTube and watch Luciano, because it's the perfect Italianate sound. Just amazing.
Did he rehearse very much, or he had such talent he didn't need to rehearse?
I don't know. I didn't really know him. I did a concert with him once on television that's still there. I love the fact that if he wanted me to cut off my high note, he would just squeeze my arm really hard. Mm-hmm. It's like, don't even think about singing past me.
Oh, wow.
But I just thought he was an incredible singer.
So were there other performers in popular music or opera that you really enjoyed performing with in particular?
Well, I'm a jazz fan, so I did several projects with various jazz singers, and I listened to them. I'm really definitely a fan.
So there's one question here that says, what is the song or piece that makes the hair stand on your arms? Is there one piece of music, one song that you really, when you hear it, you say, wow, this is great?
So I was worse than that, because I would develop obsessions with music and would listen to one piece all night long when I was young. And I can't even tell you why. And even now, when I learn a new role in an opera, earworms for me are always a phrase from another singer in the opera, not the stuff that I'm doing. So, but the goosebumps, I remember the last time I saw Queen of Spades, it was at the Vienna State Opera, which is kind of an opera about Tchaikovsky, about obsession. And the end of it surprises me, because he inserts an a cappella male choir in the middle of this awful ending. And it shocks me. And every time it happens, I start crying. And then the orchestra comes in and plays one of the most beautiful, haunting, just killer melodies. See, there's nothing. I just learned the other night that psilocybin research for veterans, all of the research is always done with music. There's nothing that brings our emotions out more, I would say, than a musical experience.
So one of the questions, let me summarize it, the essence of it is that performers often come down with mental health issues because of the intense pressure that they get to perform well, but that the employers or organizations don't really do much to help provide mental health care for performers who are struggling. Is that a problem that you think is a serious one, and is it addressed in your book?
It certainly was a problem during the pandemic, because nobody had any work, and so many young artists had to leave the city and move back in with their parents, or just leave New York altogether, or abandon their careers altogether. And I saw that quite a bit, and that is really tragic. And I don't know the degree to which it's all coming back again, but the employers, we are, as singers, are absolutely independent, and there is no support for us in that way. The unions try, they're trying to bring things together, but you have to pay for your own health insurance, all of your expenses, pretty much everything. So it's yeah, if you're a superstar, if you get really successful, it can be absolutely wonderful, but many people are kind of just barely making even.
If somebody came to you and said, I would like to be an opera singer like you, I'm 20 years old, I'm graduating from college, what would you say to them? Say, try something else? It's not that easy to do? Or what advice would you give to somebody?
Well, I'll tell you what I say to them. I say double major. I said, very few people make it, very few. And to get singers into a university or a conservatory, it's a pretty low bar. If, you don't have to have the thousands of hours of study that an instrumentalist has already had. Singers sometimes, you know, yeah, you sound pretty good, we'll take you. And then I said, and then I'll say when I'm working with young artists, I'll say, how many of you will have debt? And it's 99% of them. So I said, you really need to think about something you can earn a living doing if this doesn't work out. And now I say, think about healthcare. Think about healthcare. We need you. There aren't enough music therapists. There aren't enough creative arts therapists. And in California, where they have a phenomenal gift for education, for arts education, imagine pairing creative arts therapists with artistic educators who have pro-social learning training, who can help kids with morale. They can help teachers even with morale. So it could be a wonderful combination to bring this type of therapist into a school setting.
So when you're an opera performer, as we discussed earlier, you have to project a certain way so somebody way in the back can hear you. But when you're performing with amplification, you don't have to quite do that because you have the amplification. Do you sing differently that way, and does it strain you to go from one to the other?
When I did Carousel on Broadway, which I loved, it was a wonderful experience. It was a really big adjustment for me to get used to someone in the back controlling my volume. Because I always learn the acoustic of a space, even a bad space, and eventually I figure it out, and I am in control of how I sound in the space. But you have to just trust that they know what they're doing. It's a really interesting transition. And now I use both. When I concertize, I pick the mic up, I talk to the audience, I put it down, sing classical, and then I pick it up again and sing a pop song. So I use both, and people don't seem to mind or notice.
Okay. What is your proudest accomplishment outside of opera, and why?
Oh, my 2 daughters, bar none. Bar none. Yeah.
So, one of your daughters is here.
Amelia's here.
Yes.
Yay.
There she is. Okay. Now, this daughter has chosen not to become an opera performer, but she's going to do something almost as important. What is that?
Yes, she is already, I think, a doctor, right? Can I call you a doctor now?
In like 3 more weeks.
3 more weeks. All right.
Okay, great. Okay.
Yes. And she's doing her residency at Mount Sinai, so she'll be in this neighborhood.
All right, I don't know what this means, but I'm sure you will. Can you discuss embellishments? Do you embellish or change the vocal line? If so, how? You know what embellishments? What do you mean? Like you embellish
do you in the sense of improvisation,
yes,
or in the sense of Baroque music, or I'm not sure I understand the question.
It means like, I guess, do you change the song or the words ever, or do you change it while you're performing?
Not in classical music. No, we're very true to the composition. The most we'll do is make some cuts here and there. But no, we're not allowed to do that unless it's Baroque music, and then we definitely want to do that. And it's basically on a repeat. We can decorate, we can embellish what we've done.
So, by the way, on the question of what song made your hair stand on your arms, you didn't say what. Did you say what song it was?
Well, I was talking about an opera, but an actual song, I don't know.
No. Okay.
Yeah, there are too many. There are just too many.
Is it your perception that opera audiences in Europe are much more sophisticated than opera audiences in the United States?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would not say that. They have a longer tradition than we do. Let's face it, the music that we listen to in opera is European music. Italian opera is the foundation of it. It was the beginning of it. And then it's German and French and sometimes Russian. Those are the main languages. So American opera is relatively new and booming. The Hours. Please come in and see The Hours. Yes. So, I mean, 40% of the audience last year had never been to the Met before. That's an incredible statistic.
So when an opera is performed, let's say at the Met, typically you'll have how many performances of that opera before you go into some other opera? Is it 3 or 4?
No, it's usually about between 8 and 10.
8 and 10. And so you need about 2 or 3 days in between each one to rest your voice and so forth?
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
And we have rehearsals. So, long rehearsal periods sometimes for a new production.
Okay. And so today, would you say that opera is declining in popularity, staying the same, or going up?
It's hard to say. We're in a transition, and it's a generational one because we're welcoming a younger audience into the house, and I think it'll be really interesting to see if they love it and keep coming back. I mean, that's the key, obviously. It's also a very expensive art form. It is the most expensive by far of the performing arts, and that's just the nature of it. There are so many people backstage making these performances come to life. So it's not an easy art form. It needs a lot of support.
So in terms of getting people to be healthier when they're injured, they have a traumatic injury, you point out that some people have traumatic brain injuries. They can, with a music therapist, I guess, coming in, they can actually get back to more or less normal. Is that right? With the help of a good musical therapist?
They can regain speech. There's a lot they can regain. They can also regain the will to live. They can regain a kind of sense of self and identity. But regaining speech is a beautiful movie you can rent on Amazon Prime called Music Got Me Here, about a young boy from Middleburg, Virginia, who had a traumatic brain injury while snowboarding without a helmet. And he's made a remarkable improvement. But the film itself is really about how a music therapist, Tom Schweitzer, changed the game for him and his survival.
So you seem to be a relatively happy person. Why are you so happy? You seem to be, happy. I mean, I'm always not so happy. How do you get to be so happy?
No, first of all, I'm complex too. I'm insecure. As I said, I had terrible stage fright. So, but I think I'm innately more positive. I would say. I wouldn't say happy. I would say I'm positive. I don't know. Ask Amelia. She would be able to. She would answer this question probably better than I would. But we are under a lot of pressure all the time, and I'm always doing too much.
Was there one? I think in your autobiography you talked about a few teachers you had who really help you dramatically get better. I think one was at Juilliard.
Yes.
So if you have very good teachers, can it help you along your way? And is there some point where you say, I can make it, I can do this as a profession? Or it just happens, it evolves, you don't really have a moment where you say, yes, I know I'm going to be great at this?
You know, it's interesting because there were moments when the outside world validated what I was doing, and that was meaningful. And by the way, I should have said my husband's here too. He knows a lot now about if I'm happy or not. Yeah. Tim, ask Tim. So I would say there was a moment that I'll never forget where a review said I had a beautiful voice, and I was under the impression that I would never have a beautiful voice, but I was a good musician and smart and could figure things out. And when the review said that, I brought it into my teacher, who was at Juilliard at the time. I said, look, do I have a beautiful voice? Maybe I do. And it was a real turning point. We do need that validation. I mean, how many people have a job where you're reviewed literally in the paper the next day? But, not everyone.
You point out in the book that if you do everything right, but you don't have a beautiful voice, it's not going to work. So, right? I mean, you need a beautiful voice. You need
a distinctive timbre. I like the most beautiful sounds. You can do a lot with them. You don't always have to make beautiful noises when you're singing. You want variety. But it has to be, you have to turn on a radio and go, I know who that is. You don't want a generic sound, you know what I mean? So somebody said that to me too when I was about 19. They said, you're lucky, you have a unique timbre.
So how do you avoid bad weather and cold? So if it's a stormy weather or something, you might catch a cold. How do you avoid, you just don't go out when it's a cold weather, or how do you avoid catching a cold? Do you ever get sick?
Well, my Achilles heel are my ears. I like to have I don't want my ears to get too cold. So that's one thing. I don't worry about scarves. But the main thing, we have to stay hydrated. Speaking over noise is deadly for me. So unfortunately, I don't get to go out and eat in New York restaurants very much.
Yeah, have you noticed that the most restaurants these days think that the higher the loudness is, the higher the tip will be, I guess, or the bill, because restaurants really seem to be promoting noise.
There was a study, and people said, if it's not loud, it must not be good. And I thought, no, don't do that, because I'd like to start a chain called Calma.
So if people in the audience here and people watching are not opera aficionados yet, what's a good reason they should go to an opera?
Oh my gosh, everybody should go to the opera, for sure. I mean, come and see the Hours. If you don't already like opera, it would be an interesting thing for you to try. Also, El Niño is coming out this week, which I saw the production a few minutes of it, and I can't wait to see it. It looks incredible. So yeah, everybody should try it.
Okay. So
And it's like, it's one of the art forms that is now kind of fractured into all different styles. So it's good if you go to a really famous traditional opera like Carmen or La Bohème, Traviata, but then also try something new because you might like that more.
So today, if you could perform any one opera, and somebody's asked this, it's going to be your last opera ever you're going to perform publicly, what would that opera be?
You mean something I've never done?
Well, something you like doing, but
or
maybe
I like doing. Well, I think, I don't know. I mean, that's a tough question to answer because I'm really more focused now on creating interesting concert works that I can tour with. That's my real passion right now. I'm not currently looking for new opera experiences or even old ones.
All right, so on this book, you will be out talking about it a fair bit, and you're going to be on television, I assume, and you've done some interviews I've already seen about it. But I congratulate you for trying to have another career. You've already had a number of careers. This is another one where you're trying to get people's health to be better. And I think I might try to learn a musical instrument. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do it. And fortunately, you won't have to hear me sing because I know I won't be able to do that. But I want to thank you for all the things you've done for the country and for the music world. And this book is another great contribution. Renée Fleming has been an incredible performer for our country in many different ways, going around the world, performing, and also performing at many great things like the Kennedy Center. And you've won every award our country can give you. I don't know what else you can get, but probably the highest award is probably being interviewed here at the 92nd Street Y. So I want to thank you for coming to the 92nd Street Y and giving everybody a chance to learn more about your new career, which is helping people learn more about how music can make them healthier. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Thank you. It's so great.
Okay.
Thank you.